Try to remember what you had for lunch 3 Tuesdays ago. You can't. Not really. Maybe a guess, maybe a blur, but the actual moment? Gone. Now try Wednesday of that same week. Also gone. In fact, out of the roughly 27,000 days you'll live if you make it to 75, you will be able to clearly recall almost none of them. Most of your life didn't disappear because nothing happened. It disappeared because your brain was never designed to keep it. Here's the number that should unsettle you. In 1885, a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus ran an experiment on himself. He memorized lists of meaningless syllables, then tested his own recall over time, alone in his study for years. What he found became known as the forgetting curve, and it's one of the most replicated findings in psychology. Without any reinforcement, humans forget roughly 50% of new information within an hour. Within a day, we lose closer to 70%. Within a month, over 90% is gone. And that's for information you were actively trying to remember. Most of your life, you weren't trying at all. But this raises an obvious question. If forgetting is the default, why do certain days survive? Why can you recall exactly where you were during one specific afternoon a decade ago in total detail, while an entire ordinary year sits behind it in fog? In 1977, psychologists Roger Brown and James Kulik coined a term for this: flashbulb memories. They studied how people remembered the assassination of John F. Kennedy and found something strange. People weren't just remembering the event, they were remembering irrelevant sensory details around it. What they were wearing, who they were standing next to, the exact chair they were sitting in. The emotional jolt of the moment seemed to weld ordinary background details permanently into memory, details that would normally have been discarded within hours. Neuroscientists later traced this to a small, almond-shaped structure deep in your brain called the amygdala. When something emotionally intense happens, the amygdala essentially flags the moment as important, triggering the release of stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline that strengthen the memory encoding process in the hippocampus. Your brain, in other words, doesn't record your life like a camera running continuously. It's closer to a security guard who is bored 99% of the time and only picks up the pen to write something down when an alarm goes off. This explains why the days you remember are rarely the ordinary good ones. They're the car crash you nearly had, the day someone died, the fight, the kiss. Your brain isn't keeping a diary of your happiness, it's keeping a survival log. So what happens to everything else? It's not exactly gone. It's more complicated and stranger than that. In 2017, neuroscientists Paul Franklin and Blake Richards at the University of Toronto published a theory that reframes forgetting entirely. They argued that forgetting isn't a flaw in memory. It's an active, deliberate function of a healthy brain. Their research on mice showed that the hippocampus continuously generates new neurons throughout life, a process called neurogenesis, and that this very process appears to overwrite and destabilize older memory traces to make room. In other words, your brain may be forgetting on purpose, clearing out yesterday's clutter so today's more urgent information has somewhere to go. Franklin put it directly in interviews. The goal of memory isn't to transmit the most information over time, it's to guide intelligent decision-making in the present. A brain that remembered everything, every conversation, every meal, every red light you sat at, wouldn't be smarter. It would be paralyzed, drowning in irrelevant noise, unable to tell which memory mattered. There's a real version of this. In 2006, a woman known in case studies as AJ was found to have an extraordinarily rare condition, now called highly superior autobiographical memory. Give her any date, and she could recall in exhausting detail exactly what happened, what day of the week it was, what she wore, what was on the news. But AJ described her own condition not as a gift, but as a burden. She said it felt like watching a split screen constantly, the present moment always intruding on an endless, uncontrollable film of her own past. She couldn't stop remembering, even when she desperately wanted to. Your forgetting is not a malfunction. It's what allows you to function at all. But there's a deeper, stranger layer to this. Even the memories you do keep aren't fixed recordings. In the early 2010s, neuroscientist Kareem Nader ran experiments showing that every time you recall a memory, your brain briefly makes it unstable again, then rewrites it back into storage, a process called reconsolidation. This means the memory you have of your 5th birthday isn't the original moment. It's the last version of the story you told yourself, slightly altered every single time you remembered it before. You're not watching old footage, you're redrawing the picture from memory of the last drawing, again and again for years. This is also very likely why you remember almost nothing before the age of 3 or 4, a phenomenon called infantile amnesia. It isn't that nothing happened. Babies form memories constantly. But the hippocampus, the structure responsible for stitching moments into a retrievable narrative memory, is still under construction in early childhood. The memories may briefly exist, but the shelving system to file and later retrieve them isn't built yet. The books were written, the library just didn't exist. So here is what's actually true about your life. It didn't happen and then get filed away. It happened, and your brain made a series of ruthless, mostly unconscious decisions about what was worth the metabolic cost of keeping. Threat, novelty, emotional intensity. Anything ordinary, safe, and repeated, the walks, the dinners, the thousands of unremarkable Tuesdays that made up most of your actual existence, were quietly discarded. Not because they didn't matter to you at the time, but because keeping them serves no purpose for a brain built to prepare you for tomorrow, not preserve yesterday. You are not a record of your life. You are the residue of the parts of it your brain decided you might need again.